Good morning, everybody. Sorry for a slight delay there. Thank you for joining us today. We're talking about payroll income overview specifically. See, there's still some people joining, but I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And of course, we are recording, so this will be available for later on for you to review. And if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask those questions. We do have a chat. We also have a Q&A. And we're monitoring those things, and we're going to answer them as questions come up. So please don't hesitate to ask those, and we will make sure to answer them as quickly as we can. So let me go ahead and switch this over. So you should be able to see my browser now. So here in self-service, of course, incomes is not really does a lot in self-service. You of course see it on your pay stubs, and the employees can see a little bit in self-service, but where we're going to focus today is going to be in the admin portion of it. Just a real quick overview on what you can see here in self-service. Of course, the employees, if they have access to it, they can see incomes, which would list any incomes that are assigned to them. They can't really do much from here besides see them and see old inactive ones, but that's what they can see here. And then, of course, in the pay history, they'll be able to see any incomes that were paid out on their current check, as well as year-to-date stuff. So they can go over to their pay history and see those things here. I don't think I have any pay history for this year for this person, but going back to a previous year, obviously I've got incomes there. So see those things there. As you can see how they look with the code and descriptions, we're going to talk about that. So let's go over to the actual configuration where all the magic is going to happen here over in payroll administration. So if you aren't familiar with how to get here, or just not sure, under payroll administration, you're going to see incomes. And then you're also going to see something we're going to talk about is compensation types that are right here. So those are two things that are going to go into incomes. Now, if you're not really sure where they are, or you can't find them because there's a lot of things, you can just type in, the first few letters of incomes or compensation, and you'll see that they come up right there. So let's look at incomes. I've already clicked on it, so you can see here it's already on my screen. And these are various ones I've set up. Of course, yours is going to be completely different than what I have. Maybe they happen to share the same name or a code or something like that, but these are for mine, and yours is going to be different. I would suggest, if you're going to be doing this in your system and trying things out, or at least seeing how things are set up, maybe go into your sandbox and do things in there, because if you make a mistake in your sandbox, of course, it's not going to affect live payroll checks. This could impact payroll, so be very careful here. And as always, if there's questions, don't hesitate to reach out to support here. As you can see, the little question mark. First off, we have help on how incomes are set up, but also how to reach us. So if you do have questions on, what does it mean if I do this or whatever, we're going to cover it, but we're going to look at this here. So I'm going to click in here just to show you the setup of this. Now, of course, incomes are done by employer. I've got 2 employers in my system. If you only have one, that's not really a concern, but if you have multiple, you'll see the employer right there. And of course, back on the previous screen, I got the employer right here. So I can switch to the other employer and, make changes or whatever there. So if I do, let's say, a bonus on both companies, and I make a change on one of them, it's not going to necessarily update the other one unless I go in and do it. So if I say, as an example, put a rate in here, and that's the new rate for bonus, it's not going to be the rate when I go over to the other company. So just be aware of that. These are per company settings. Same thing would happen. Let's say you've got an employee who's using this code and they're in multiple companies. You're going to need to update it on both copies of them, on the one in company A and the one in company B, or whatever they happen to be called. All right, so let's look at the configuration. Of course, the code and description, those are completely up to you. So you can do whatever you like here. Some companies, they like to put the full word here as the code. Others may do abbreviation like I did. Maybe you've got a numeric thing or some other schema for your coding, and that's totally fine. We internally, if you look in the address bar here, that's our code internally. So it doesn't really matter what you use as your code. That's what we refer to. So sometimes we'll see where there might be 2 incomes with the same description, or maybe even the same code. It doesn't bother the system if they're that way. Maybe that's just for like when it's on their stub or something, and you don't want it to show like bonus for exempt and bonus for non-exempt. You just want to call it bonus, but they are separate in some way. You could use the same description, even the same code, if you like. Of course, it might get confusing to somebody when they go to assign it. Which bonus code do I add, or which code, So we recommend you at least know what your the codes are. Maybe you print out a list or something like that, so you know which ones to assign, and there's no confusion there. So let me just go down your compensation type. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'll click on this here to show these, and I'll show you where you can set these up, or at least look at them. This is just telling the system, what is this particular income? You know, what is it handling? Sometimes this affects the taxes, or maybe how it reports, let's say on the W-2 or things like that. So it might make an impact on that, whatever you select here. So as an example, I've got this one as cash. You may have something that is, you know, a group term life insurance or something that is all going to affect the taxes and how things show up over there. Maybe something is a pre-tax or not taxable, or it shows up with a special code on the tax forms. So that's what these are for. If you don't see one in here that you need, maybe it's something that is new. And of course, we add those things if new laws come in that affect something, or maybe it's just something you want separate for whatever reason, and you want to set up the taxability. That's where the compensation types come in, and I'll cover that. All right, pay type. We have 3 different ones here. Regular, it's going to be, you know, like a regular payment that happens, you know, it's taxed with using the regular tax rates and stuff like that. Reimbursement, it's a reimbursement. It's typically not taxed. I think our reimbursements are all set as not taxable. So, you know, somebody used their own money to pay for a flight or a hotel or something, and you're reimbursing them. That's what that is for there. It's not taxed. And then supplemental, what that does is it uses the supplemental tax table. So whatever the supplemental rate is for federal as well as state or provincial taxes, that's what that would be. You know, maybe it's, let's say 25%. It doesn't matter what the person is claiming, it's always going to be 25% or something along those lines. Right, the calculation methods. So you can see various ones here. We have 8 different ones right now. Maybe in the future we'll add others, but let's talk about these right now. Amount, pretty straightforward. It's just an amount. So it might be $1,000, it might be $10, something like that, where it's a fixed amount. Now, it doesn't mean it's fixed all the time. You can put a rate here, but it can be overridden on a person. So you might say that this bonus is always $50, but that doesn't mean that you can't override it either on the employee or during payroll. But it is a fixed amount. We're not going to look at hours or any type of formulas or anything like that. Speaking of formulas, we have 2 of them that are mentioned formulas here. Formula is just using a formula. So there might be some type of code right here, some function that looks at some information and does a calculation. It's not necessarily the hours. It might be, let's say, a sum of all the dollars and divided by something. That might be an example of a formula. We have several formulas available. We're always adding these things too as people request new things. You can see some of the formulas when you come over here to the help. Let's see if I can find one here. So here you can see we got a formula, right? Sum productive as an example. So that's just an example of one of them. Of course, we have many other formulas that are available. And if you need something that is a formula calculation based off of, maybe you take some type of income minus some deductions, and then you multiply that by some number or whatever, that could be an example of a formula. All right, formula plus hourly. What that means is you might use a formula to not just for the rate, but also for the hours. So you might say this is a minimum wage, and then the hours that are productive. I don't know. It could be something like that. If you leave one of these blank, it allows you to, let's say, all hours. So maybe the formula is minimum wage. We take the minimum wage rate from a particular location times number of hours there. So you leave hours blank, formula rate would be minimum wage. And you could do that vice versa. Maybe there's a calculation of hours, and then the formula is just a rate. Could be like $15 or something like that. All right, FTE or full-time equivalents. That's going to look at the full-time equivalents on the employee. So maybe there's one full-time equivalent and they get $2,000 for every full-time equivalent. So if somebody's half-time or something like that, and then it's 0.5, be 0.5 times $2,000, and of course that'd be $1,000. All right, hourly. Again, I think this one's pretty straightforward. It's just hours. So from a timesheet or entering in the number of hours, think of it as like regular overtime, something like that, where you're getting hours and multiplying it by a rate. All right, minimum wage. So this is a specific calculation using our minimum wage calculations out here. What this is typically doing, or what this does, is it will look at the minimum wage rate at a particular location and compare it against the person's hourly rate. So let's say the minimum wage rate is $15 an hour. but their rate is $12 an hour because they're normally not working in that location. It'll pay them the minimum wage rate of $15. So that's what that is right there. All right, salary. This is going to pay a fixed salary for an employee. This could be possibly prorated, but it's a salaried employee. Maybe they're getting $5,000 every 2 weeks. That would be an example of a salary. It doesn't matter if they had 2 hours or they had 200 hours. It's going to be $5,000. And then finally, units. So that's not hours, it's units. Think of it as like, oh, you're doing a mileage reimbursement and it's, I don't know, 100 miles and they're getting 60 cents a mile. It'll do something like that, 100 times 60 cents, and it will give them, $60 or whatever the situation might be. But it's not hours, it's a unit of measure. All right, I'm going to go down to the bottom in a second, but let me cover this stuff here on the right. Of course, active means that we're actually going to be using this code. So you can add it to employees and things like that. Now, you may have a code that becomes inactive. So you might check this off, but you, of course, need to make sure that it's inactive on the employees as well. So this just means you can't select it from the drop-down menu on a new employee or on any employee because it's not active anymore. All right, overtime eligible. So if you're doing things that are hourly or maybe even flat dollar amounts is part of the calculation for overtime. So maybe you're doing hourly and you're saying this is regular and more than 40 hours in a week is overtime. So this box would need to be checked in that situation. All right, include in the certified rate calculation. So if you're doing certified rate tables and calculations of certified rates, this would include this income in any calculations for certified rates. All right, using a rate table, what that allows you to do is to pay people by the number of pieces they get done. So maybe you're saying, all right, if they complete this this piece of work, installing this machinery, doing this thing, they're going to get $500 as an example. That's a rate table. You would say, okay, this piece is worth 500. They did 100% of it, so they get the $500. That's what a rate table is for. It's for piece rate work like that. And then makeup pay. It's similar to overtime. What this is for specifically, I know the state of California has this, but other states I think have this option as well, where you can bank time worked in a week and use it for time off. And it's specifically overtime. You're going to say, well, I want to take off Friday early. Maybe I want to take off 4 hours early on Friday. So I'm going to work overtime on Monday and Tuesday, 2 hours Monday, 2 hours Tuesday, and use that to cover my overtime on Friday. That's what makeup time is for. This is part of that setup of that. If you need to set it up, our support is here to help you, but that's part of that calculation there. All right, rate, of course, that depends on whatever I selected over here. So for example, I chose units, and of course, if I do amount, you'll notice that rates there. Sometimes if I do formula, these will add different fields here, but this is the rate, the default rate for this particular income code. Hours could be, if there was a formula or something for the hours, but that's what that would be. Let's say there's a certain amount that I always want this to be $100, $50. That's going to be the default rate for that. If I don't put something here, I would put it on the employee record, or I would put it actually in payroll. So let's say bonus, I'm not going to put a rate here because bonus is variable depending on the situation. Maybe on the employee record, that's where I put the $1,000. Or when I'm processing payroll, I add it in the payroll batch of $1,000. All right, the system labels, these can be used for formulas. It could be used for tax forms and things like that. It's just identifying this income code for various purposes. One of my examples I talked about with formula hours and rates is productive. So you might use a system label that says this is a productive income, and then we reference that in the formula. Or you'll see here shift rates. So this particular one counts as part of the shift rate, distribution bonus. It could just be used to label something, or it might be used to show somewhere on a tax form. It needs to go in a certain box. So you put it down as, box 14 or box 12 or something like that. And so there's various labels that are in here. You'll see here when I click on this, I've got box 12, I've got T4, box 14, etc. So these could be used to identify where things go on forms as well, not necessarily impacting a calculation, but somewhere where it goes on a tax form. All right, the payroll number in the month. So if you're paying, let's say weekly, there might be 4 or 5 pay periods in the month. And this tells the system, when do you calculate this particular income? So there might be a situation where you do, let's say, a cell phone reimbursement, and it's the first payroll of the month. So you would just have first year, and then all the other payrolls in the month, it would not do that cell phone calculation. Could be used, let's say, first and second, your biweekly. Whenever there's that third period, it doesn't come into play. So we would only have first and second. You can leave this blank, which means it's available for all periods. You don't have to label them all, but you can if you want to say for specific periods. You see them here. We have first through fifth, and then also last. All right, then down here are the limits. So these are the different limits that may apply to an income code. So period being the period limit, the pay period limit, monthly, the monthly limit, annual limit or ceiling, and then lifetime limit or ceiling. Now, of course, this is going to look at things like the date ranges of this as well. So you may not reach a ceiling if, let's say, a income expires ahead of time. All right, the lifetime is determined by the effective date and the expiration date. So you might say the lifetime is from January 1st through June 30th, and that's the lifetime. Maybe they reach it in that time frame, maybe they don't. But a new income code that starts after June 30th is going to have a different lifetime because it's after the other one expired. And so that's what that's about there. All right, one last thing up here is the required timesheet fields. What this means is you might want to say on a timesheet, if they select this income code, of course, it needs to be hourly or units, but they need to then fill in these fields on the timesheet. These fields become required on the timesheet. So maybe for regular hours, they need to fill in the project and task, but if they're doing vacation or some other type of income code, they don't need to fill in the project and task, or maybe, sub-project is required if they're doing a certain code where it's not required for hourly. But that allows you to do this on the income code level. Now, we do have a setting on the timesheet that allows you to do it for the entire timesheet layout. And they do work in conjunction with each other. So you might say, well, project is required for every income, but then for regular, also task is required. So you might come in here and check off task. All right, now, of course, the buttons at the bottom, delete. You won't be able to delete a code that you've used or it's been assigned to somebody. So if I hit delete here, it's probably going to give me an error message saying I can't do that because somebody already has that there. But let's say I just set one up right now and then I realize I made a mistake and I want to delete it. I can delete it. Cancel would undo any changes that I've done. And then save, of course, going to save those changes, anything I changed. All right, let's talk about compensation. And then I'll show you, of course, how to assign this to employees. So we'll go down here to system configuration. Let me scroll down a little bit. And here's compensation types. So this is where I was mentioning early on when we were talking about income code is the various taxability of stuff, as well as where it might show up on tax forms and so forth. But there's a whole bunch of them that are already configured for you. I'm going to sort them by code just so you can kind of see these. Now, you can't change any of these here. So if you were saying, well, I don't like the way the bonus is configured, you can't do anything about it. You're not allowed to touch this. This is all just hard coded into the system. But if you did need to set up a new code, I believe I have one now. Here we go. So I have this one called Cash COVID. Well, actually, let me do this one. This is taxable, no withholding. So this is how you could create a custom compensation type. So when you do that, you need to come up with a code. I believe, and I think Patrick or Connor will correct me if I'm wrong, the code has to be 4 digits or 4 characters. I don't know if it's numbers or digits, but it has to be 4. It can't be 1, anything less than 4. And it can't already exist in the system. So I can't do like 1000 and then 1000 again. I'd have to do 1001 or something like that. The name is kind of like the other ones. They don't need to be unique, but I highly recommend you make them unique so you know what you're doing when you're actually selecting it in the drop-down menu. And then here you'll see different types. So various types of income here. So this is going to determine, first off, is it paid to the employee? And then also, how do we handle the taxes? Let's go over all 6 of these here. The first 3 are, say, cash, which means this is money the employee is getting added to their paycheck. So, of course, it might be deducted later on, but let's say it's $1,000 of cash you're actually getting. That's what cash means on that. And then we have non-subject or subject, and that's telling us whether it is subject to a particular tax or not. So if it's not subject, that means it is tax-free. So think of it like a reimbursement. They're getting the money, but they're not actually being taxed on it. Now, if it's not subject to tax, of course, it's also non-taxable, not withholding anything. So now that's where these two come into play. Cash subject means it's subject to a particular tax, but non-taxable means you're not withholding anything. And then subject taxable means it's subject to the tax and you're going to withhold taxes. All right, and then you kind of see the opposite, not the opposite, but these are not paid out. So sometimes there's like an imputed income. Think if you're in the United States, group term life insurance over $50,000. It might be like a spouse insurance plan or domestic partner insurance plan. That was one. I don't know if they still do that anymore, where they had to put the value of something that the person's getting. Maybe you hand out gift cards to your employees and you need to reflect that value. That might be non-cash because they got a gift card, but you're not going to give them cash as well. They got a $100 gift card. You want to show that on their stub that they got it and they have to pay the taxes on it. So that would be non-cash. Of course, then we have the not subject, not taxable, which means I'm not even sure why you put on there, maybe just to show them, hey, you got a gift card. And then here, subject to taxes, but we're not withholding any. And here's the subject to taxes and we're withholding. All right, and then you can set this for each individual tax code down here as well, because sometimes a federal tax might be a little different than a local, state, or provincial tax. So maybe with US federal withholdings, it's cash subject taxable, but then you get down to a particular state and it's non-taxable. So let me just choose Alabama as an example. For Alabama, you might say, oh, well, that one is subject, but not taxable. So we're not going to withhold anything. We're just going to report it as taxable wages. So they can be different between one tax code and another. I know there are several examples that I'm familiar with where it is taxable on the state level, not taxable on the federal level, but you still report those wages. So that's what that is for. You'll see here, I just add them one at a time. Unfortunately, it's not like I can add all 50 states or all the provinces or all the locals. Got to do them one at a time, which is kind of a pain. But once it's set up, it's not too bad. And then this little trash can will remove it. All right, once you have that configured, then you can go back to your income code and you can use that particular compensation type on the income code. All right, now adding incomes to employees. Of course, that is going to be something that you can add directly to an employee record. Let me just pick an employee. All right, under payroll, you'll see incomes, and I can add an income here. Now, you'll see things like, let's say regular with 0 rate. That's because we're going to use the rate from their position. We're not going to override that rate with a different rate, but that's what you could use that for. You might say, well, normally they're paid $20 an hour, but I'm going to override regular to be 25. And then it's going to use 25 because that's what the override rate is. So just be aware of that. If you put an amount on something that's going to be used as a default on the timesheet, it's going to use that number here rather than what's on their, let's say their employment, their position. So let me show you adding. Super easy to do this. You choose the income code, whatever that is, let's say parking. All right, and then whatever the situation is. Now, some of these, if you check this off, it's actually going to show that in the timesheet. Of course, that does depend on the configuration of the code. For an example, let's say I add bonus to him. I don't remember if it was already there. If I check show on timesheet, it's not going to actually show on the timesheet because it's an amount code. All right, so that is something that you will not see on the timesheet. But if I did something that was hours or units or formula hours plus formula rate, then it would show on the timesheet if I check this box. So this does need to be checked for it to show on the person's timesheet when they go to add time or clock in or something like that. All right, when I do this, of course, now the effective date. So this does come into play. Let's say I made it effective July 1st. I wouldn't be able to pay it until after July 1st. So that does matter. Same thing with the expiration date. If I expire something and then I want to go use it, it's going to be expired. But let's just say June 1st. Anytime I'm in a date field, I can just type the month and day and it will assume the current year, which is great most of the time. The only time it really can come into play is, let's say it's January 3rd and you really want it back to last year, or it's December and you wanted to go to next year. You just be aware of that. But you saw I typed in 6/1, it did 23. You can, of course, use the little calendar, or you can type in the full year like I did there, or like I didn't do, but you could. Here's the amount. If I don't put an amount here, it's not going to pay it unless I put it on the timesheet or I import it in. So let's say I wanted to pay this person $100. Now, maybe I want to give them $100 and then that's it. So I might come over here and in the lifetime, put $100. That's going to pay him $100 on the next check where it's in that, period. And of course, it's the effective date and all those things like that. Once he's paid the $100, it's going to stop because I have that lifetime ceiling there. If I made it $50 with a $100 lifetime ceiling, it's going to pay $50 the first time it can. and then $50 the next time, and then stop. Or if I overrode the 50 and I made it 75, of course, it will do 75 the first time, and then 25 until it gets to the $100 limit. All right, so pretty straightforward, I think, on this. And you can see that right there. Of course, if I want to see older codes, I can see things that possibly he had before. And if I no longer want to pay this out to the person, I can expire it. And that will stop it. So that's how you do that there. Now, what the employee saw in the pay stub, you saw the code and description. There is a setting to determine what shows there. Let me just go there real quick. Got a couple more minutes, so I want to talk about that. In your payroll settings, we do have an option for how do you want to show income format. So you may remember on that pay stub, it said hourly HR. Here you can determine how that shows. Maybe you just like the description. You don't need, people don't need to worry about the codes. You do that. Maybe the codes are useful and you want to just do that, or maybe you want to do them both. All right. And then finally, if you do need to ever import in incomes, let's say you're going to do bonuses for a bunch of people, there's a couple of things you could do. One is you could add it to them all through an import through right here. Data import, payroll. I believe it's under payroll employee, if I'm not mistaken, where you can import incomes. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe Patrick or Connor will correct me, but you can import in incomes to employees. So that allows you to do that. Of course, you can download a template. Let me just see. I'm pretty sure this one has incomes on it, where you can import in, but this is loading the income codes to employees. So this would be useful if you were going to, let's say, mass load a new income code to people. It's not under this one. Where is it? Is it under employees? Maybe it's under quote. There it is. Employee incomes. I'm sorry. 1D is employee incomes. I don't do this every day. So, but this allows you to mass load incomes to employees. So a new timesheet code you're now going to do and you want to add it to everybody, you can use this. Download the template after you set up the code, of course, and then load it to everybody. And there's an option in here to, let me just share this. There's an option in here to say you want to show it in the timesheet. So you'll see here, whatever the employee number is, the new income code, the effective date, and then you'll see show in timesheet, yes. So maybe there's a new code, you guys are doing something new. So that's what that could be for. The other thing, as I mentioned, is you may want to import something into the payroll batch. That's something you probably want to work with support on. How do you set up that import? Because it does matter what's set up in payroll. You'll see here, there's settings down here for the layout of this, but it is something in a payroll batch you can import in, let's say, a bunch of bonuses. So you don't have to go manually add bonus to 100 people or 1,000 people. You can import it. Let me just do that real quick and forgive my spelling there. Just want to do this real quickly, get to that. You'll see an option over here to import. Now, hopefully I don't get an error message that there's somebody who doesn't have a geocode. Here's import, and you'll see import incomes. So this is something where you can import stuff you want to pay in this batch. This is going to be a one-time payment of them. So this is not going to set it up to do $50 every paycheck. This is going to be, well, it's $50 this paycheck. And that's something you can do there. All right, so that is a quick overview on that, 30 minutes of incomes. Of course, if you do have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to support. Let's go to the next page here, maybe. There we go. I believe you can see my PowerPoint here. So this is talking about our next stuff that's coming up. So in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about certified rates. I touched on it briefly when I was talking about the income setup, but we're going to go into more detail in a couple of weeks talking about certified rates. Then we're going to jump out of payroll into setting up custom fields and custom screens in the system. So that might be of interest if you need to add something that we don't already have in the system. You can use custom fields or screens for that. Then we're going to cover a couple of recruiting topics. So candidates, and then E-Verify. So our summer's full of learning out here. Please join us if you get a chance or if you're interested in these things. As always, if you have any questions, I don't know if anything came in the Q&A, but if you have any questions after today or anything like that, reach out to us. Our phone number is there. Of course, help@criterionhcm.com, and the help icon in the administration. You can click that and you'll see both the number and the email address there so you can reach out to us if you have any questions. So thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. We will send out this video to anybody who missed any part of it. And I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.